Goal was to limit carbon emissions.
How should buyers or owners be thinking of... Hi, I'm Dorian Lamb, and welcome to Season 2 of Start with the Close in Mind. In real estate, business, and life, the people who win aren't the ones who react. They prepare, they think ahead, they see the close long before the rest of the room does. After a year of conversations with top operators and decision makers, this season goes even deeper into what it takes to close deals the right way. We'll break down the strategies, the mistakes, the mindset, and the real stories that reveal how successful people navigate complexity and come out on top. Every episode brings insights from leaders who have been in the trenches and can show you the difference between hoping a deal closes and engineering the outcome from the start. This is Season 2 of Start with the Close in Mind. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome everybody. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Local Law 97 and how it is already impacting how deals are underwritten, financed, and closed in New York City. It's a policy that many in the city have heard of by now, but the reality is that it directly affects value and execution today. Local Law 97 is no longer abstract. It's showing up in deals, and ignoring it early can lead to pricing mistakes, financing issues, and maybe even doubts at closing. But my friend, Ed Lombardo, is here to help us today. We're going to learn why Local Law 97 is more than an operating expense, how it impacts acquisitions, underwriting, and financing, and where early research and planning can materially change the outcome. Ed is a strategist and educator in real estate and spends time helping owners, buyers, and stakeholders understand how these mandates actually show up in the real world and not just in theory. Without further ado, I'm excited to have Ed Lombardo on the show. Ed, welcome. Why don't we start with a little background about yourself and how you've become so deeply involved in this space?
Well, I have many decades of experience in commercial real estate. I started my career as a commercial real estate appraiser, of which I've been licensed for quite some time. And then I moved over to the banking sector, where I was an underwriter, and then for many years a commercial real estate loan officer. So I understand property markets from a valuation and a financing side. And then I had the privilege starting in 2000 to teach for many years at NYU in their Masters of Science program, and which is a wonderful experience. And then about 2 years ago, thought just came to me that this policy, which was just still evolving at 2 years ago, was going to become impactful in the commercial real estate markets. So I've done a significant deep dive in it. And the more I study this, the more I see the impact that's forthcoming, particularly moving as we get closer to 2030, which is only 4 years away.
Yeah, that's right around the corner. So Ed, for listeners who may have heard about Local Law 97, but don't really fully understand it, can you explain in plain terms what it is, who it applies to and why it matters even now?
Well, it does matter significantly. I mean, in the general sense, we all can agree climate has changed in the last 50 years. So what we had here is in New York City, we had Sandy happened, which was a significant event and caused the people to think about what was going on with our climate and how that thing was going to evolve. So along with that, policies to deal with these challenge were evolving. Coincident with that was the Paris Accord, which looked to limit carbon emissions throughout the world and so forth. So the state and the city came up with a body of rules and regulations. The goal was to limit carbon emissions, particularly to buildings, since in New York City, that's where about 2/3 of the carbon emissions come from. And so this whole system has evolved. It is extremely bureaucratic and challenging to deal with. There's a variety of other pieces of legislation which go along with this, requiring, say, what you see on buildings, the ratings of the buildings, energy benchmarking studies, things of that nature. And so by the way that you're looking to control carbon emissions is establish a system. A building can only emit so much carbon depending on its type and its size and so forth. And if it emits more than that, it'll incur a fine. Current estimates are in this current cycle of 24 to 29, maybe $200 million. The next cycle will be approximately 600 plus million. And of that, the carbon emissions bar is going to be lowered. So therefore, more buildings are going to get fined. So maybe now 25% of the buildings in New York City, 20% may get a fine. by 2030, it's estimated about 2/3 of the buildings will incur a fine. So we have that cost pressure on the cash flows of commercial real estate. And just as importantly, are the significant increases in electric costs, which of the green regulations is a part of the reason, but not the whole reason explanation for why electric costs going up so much, along with needed improvements to the grid and the significant demands for electricity from AI data centers.
So fines going up, costs going up. One thing I often hear is that local law 97 is just, or at least perception, just another operating expense. But from your perspective, why is it dangerous oversimplification? Because it does affect NOI, right? And
Well,
how
exactly.
does that
A
consequently
fine,
affect
right. A
valuation?
fine, the city has created a new operating expense where applicable, the local law 97 fine. That will dollar for dollar reduce the net operating income. It has the same claim on the building's cash flow as a tax lien or water and sewer lien. So it has to be paid. So therefore, it's reduced it. Another impact financially on a building is it may have to incur certain improvements to the property, which require capital expenditures to increase energy efficiency. Now, some of those improvements could be a positive contribution to the building's cash flow. Simple barometer there is when the payback period for that capital improvement is a shorter period of time than the lifespan of the capital improvement. So that's another thing a building owner would have to plan for. What type of energy improvements do I need to do to get below the point we're going to find? And also, because the green legislation is part of the reason our electric costs are going up, there was just an article in today's New York Post about Con Ed getting a 10.4% electric increase. So that's something that's going to have to be considered when you project future cash flows on a property. And the other point is, if you make a commercial loan today in 2026, usually it's a 5-year term, it'll renew in 2031 when the next set of fines are in place. The city will tell you based on current information what that's going to be. And I have some examples to discuss, but that's something an underwriter and slash or a building owner would have to be thinking about. Because if you do a 25-year loan at today's terms, like less than 10% of that loan is amortized in the first 5 years. So you got to think about where am I going to be when I need to refinance this property, planning in these sharp increases in electric costs and potentially fines, potentially capital improvements required to increase the energy efficiency in the building. So those are the variables that the building owner has to consider and the lender has to consider.
Yeah, those are big considerations. You
Yeah,
know,
they're all very critical.
before we dive into how it can affect closing a deal, even after you get through the thought process of how this impacts the deal, there's a feeling perhaps that maybe local law 97 doesn't really, you know, get applied in the way that most are trying to explain to owners in terms of its impact. Meaning, is it going to go away? Right? I mean, how serious is the city about
Well,
reeling?
no, it's not going to go away. It's taken, remember the legislation was approved in 2019. And so it's had all this time to build up a bureaucratic infrastructure to implement it. And that is very much in place in our public policy. It is what the city's doing is consistent with state policy on this issue. So they go hand in hand together. And you can say disinterestedly, the current political structure is supportive of this policy. And the other thing that I think which shows that this is serious is that the Department of Buildings in their current budget has allocated a significant amount of money to enforce these legislation. And I think that speaks very well of what their priorities are. So in fiscal year 25, they're going to spend about $4 million to enforce this law. And in fiscal year 26, they budgeted about $7 million. So that speaks clearly to budgetary priorities, policy priorities in the city government.
So the city's serious about it. The fines are coming. And 2030 is even kind of a step up with regards to
Oh,
the focus.
absolutely. And if I may add one more thing, Dorian, our current mayor, part of his campaign platform was full implementation of Local Law 97.
There you go. So let's talk about this from a deal standpoint then. Let's transition to that. How should buyers or owners be thinking of local law 97 during things like acquisitions, property ownership, property management? What are the changes that should be addressed now or considered now instead of later?
Well, they have to look at, they have to have a current energy efficiency plan and see what the costs are on that, how that might temper increases in utility costs, which also could apply to gas cost and water and sewer. So they have to see what they can do prudently in a financially responsible way to moderate the increases or maybe even lower the cost. So they have to look at that the capital investment that have to go into the property. They have to look at the possibility of fines. They have to look at how do these costs impact the value of my building and how do they impact the financeability of my property because I'm buying it today with a 5-year loan term. Where am I going to be in 5 years? The average commercial real estate property is held for approximately 7 years. So, they have to plan ahead. It's not where I am today, as where am I going to be in 5 years, 7 years?
So,
And this
so
is
how,
very much part of it.
what's the best way to get assessed then? Is that something you
Well,
do
you
or
need
direct
to
people to?
Right. You'd need to contract with an engineering company or other related parties which do these types of analysis, which are required by the city's energy regulations. That every couple of years you need to have an energy audit, and it'll say, "Oh, where are the places that I can improve?" There's some certain things that the city has implemented that is saying it's called prescriptive measures that you have to do. Those are really excellent, like replacing incandescent light bulbs in a hallway with energy efficient lighting. And there's a number of what's called low-hanging fruit, things a building owner could do for a modest cost to improve energy efficiency, and the technologies in this area are improving significantly. So there's a lot to be done working with energy efficiency firms.
Interesting. There is the low hanging fruit component of it.
Yes.
Are there, so aside from avoiding the penalties, I feel you had mentioned there's gradings for buildings. What are some of the other considerations from the positive side, from the ownership perspective of doing this?
Well, what you're looking to do is what is every and all energy improvements I can make to a building where the time it takes me to pay for those improvements is a shorter time frame than the useful life of that component. For instance, if I invest money in a energy efficiency component and I can pay it off in 5 years, but everything tells me it should last 10, 12, 15 years, that's the type of improvements that a building owner should do. And that's the simple test. Now, what we're seeing though is as electric costs go up so much, actually, in a way, the rising electric costs shorten the time frame that an energy improvement can have a payback period. But that's the real challenge is how do I improve energy efficiency to the purpose of moderating increases or possibly decreasing my energy usage, which would be a positive to the property's cash flow, to its value, to its financeability.
So we're talking about the things that you can do. Obviously, there's capital expenditure here that you have to consider, especially if you are making improvements to your building. There's naturally incentives to improve in your building aside from avoiding, or would you say, avoiding fines and, having a better building to market, right? People are
Right.
going to be attracted to buildings that are more energy efficient. What are some of the ways that can help alleviate the capital expenditure weight of
Well, very good
making these?
point. Right. One of the things that you need to explore as a building owner is that there are significant resources available to help you with these energy challenges. Some of them are from Con Edison, some of them from National Grid, some of them NYSERDA, State Power Authority, some of them are from the US Department of Energy. So there's a combination of favorable financing, tax credits, and other things of that nature, which, I mean, I've seen capital improvements where half the cost of the improvement was paid for by tax credits. So
Wow.
that's something else, a building owner needs to look at those resources because there is help from the public sector, and that can make a real difference in terms of payback periods by shortening the actual capital expenditure because you've netted out the public benefits. If I may give it, for instance, if you put solar panels on your roof, say it's a co-op, there's a tax credit generated. Now, with the legislation has allowed that those tax credits can flow back to the individual shareholders proportionate to their ownership interest. That was never available before. So if say there's 10 units in a property, $1,000 tax toll, the tax credit, everybody on their personal tax return gets that credit. So that's something can help building owners deal with the cost of capital improvements and so forth.
So you see it from the end of municipalities, from the public, or just incentives being provided to the building owner. What about things like PACE? We hear PACE often.
Well,
What are the
yes,
considerations for that?
CPACE is a program that can finance all of the cost of these different energy improvements. It's been utilized more outside of New York than in. The general consensus I get from people, because there's some real challenges with the push for electrification and the high cost of union labor. But there are there are deals being done with PACE. One of the challenges to it is most likely the building that might want to use it has a current mortgage with a bank and they
Hmm.
have what's called a first lien position. They would have to agree to allow PACE financing to be superior to them, which only if someone say like myself, I can explain it to the bank why they should agree to this. But that's been a big challenge, but those funds are available.
Those funds are available, but as you had indicated, I feel like it's something that has been done maybe a handful of times at most in New York or utilized.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's very few instances. It's much more prevalent outside of New York City than in. Hopefully, conditions will be more favorable to the use of that financing because, again, it can cover all of costs. It can even go back a few years and cover energy costs that you already incurred for capital improvements. It's a really excellent financing vehicle. But again, most buildings have first lien mortgages, so you have to work. So I think the challenge is to explain to the bank why this is a mutual benefit.
Yeah. So we're talking about local law 97, the ramifications of not abiding by it, the sources that are available and incentives that are available to help with the actual improvement of the building, right? What are some of the other things? Are there any case studies here in New York that you can reference with regards to the impact that these fines can have? Is there a particular asset class that you think should be very mindful of this?
Well, no, I don't think any particular asset class is subject to this. I mean, basically, the law applies to all building types of 25,000 square feet or larger, and there's no segregations to that. Where the building class makes a difference is how the amount of carbon a building is allowed to emit is impacted by the building type. So on one extreme, they're very tight on limiting emissions from a low carbon emission user like a self-storage facility, and they allow a lot more on a supermarket, which uses a lot of electricity. So that impacts it, but the law itself applies equally to all types of property. And I have some specific examples I could go through very quickly that you had recommended to me that I can
Sure.
give you an example. Okay. So I looked at a elevator apartment building at 304 West 89th Street, 36 units, 9 stories. The projected fine is about $31,910 in 2030.
That per year?
That is per year. So if you capitalize at 6%, which is a reasonable number, that fine, you'd have a $530,000 loss in value on that property. Now, that same property, if you assume a 25-year mortgage at 6.5% interest, you would lose $400,000 mortgage amount because you have that fine to incur, which reduce your cash flow. Very quickly, I've got another example that here on 503 Canal Street, which is a hotel building, and it is projected to have a fine in 2030 of $117,000.
Wow.
Oh, that if you capitalize that at 6%, remember this is annual, so the direct cap rate is applicable here. You would have a loss of $1.95 million in value. And under the same terms I mentioned, your ability to finance the property would be reduced by $1.45 million.
That's significant.
Right. And then one more, just of something a little bit different. We've got a 68 unit. This happened to be a co-op building, but looking at it hypothetically, if it was a rental, they're looking at a fine of like $34,600, which would yield a loss in value of about $576,000 and a loss in ability to finance the property of about $430,000. Those are three real examples because every property owner is required to report their energy usage to the city, and the city has a website where they can go on to and say, okay, here's my address, here's the projections on the fines, and also to remember 2034, which is only 8 years away, the amount of carbon a building can emit is reduced again. So the fines were
Yeah.
going to go. The goal is to get to net carbon zero by 2050. The challenge to that is 85% of our electric use is is generated by the burning of fossil fuels, by approximately 80%. Wind, solar, clear, maybe around 16%, something like that.
And
So,
what was that year again where it escalates even more?
well, every 5 years, the city lowers the amount of carbons a building can emit. So the blocks of time are 24 to 29, and then 30 to 34, and then 35 to 39, and so forth, out to 2050 when we are, in theory, at zero. And all I'm
Wow.
saying is 80+% of our electric comes from the burning of either oil or gas. I don't see the financially feasible or technologically possible way to get there.
So one of the things you covered, which is very important, is number one, just the impact, just even with the case studies. Thank you for that. In terms of really understanding how it can impact your valuation, and in the case of how lenders underwrite their loans, that you've directly correlated it to the loss essentially in your ability to leverage. So this ties directly into the idea of starting with the close in mind. As a consultant on this, I mean, aside from saying, "Hey, address it now," like what are, what are some of the things that you would say if I'm a building owner and I brought you on board today, where do you start?
Well, I work with an engineering company that can provide the services needed for a building owner to do a complete energy analysis to see where there are cost-effective energy efficiency improvement projects to be put into place. I think that's the most important thing. If the building owner, in theory, should do everything they can within their financial abilities, and also considering the generous tax and other subsidies that's out there in the public sector, to make their building as efficient as possible. Primarily, I would suggest to improve energy efficiency, hopefully reduce electric cost to the building owner and to the tenants, because the majority of the electric in a building, say an apartment building, is the tenant electric. So that's what I think the building owner should do. That's the prudent investment of their time and money. And that will either mitigate the negative impact of the energy rules or possibly produce a positive impact on the value of the property and its financeability.
I'm going to guess this goes without saying, but I would like your response to it. Should people start caring about it now?
Oh, absolutely. Because this is already in place. We're already in the first cycle of the implementation of the law, and there will be a significant um, increase in the fines and what that's going to mean to the building owner. As I said, the estimates are about $200 million a year in this cycle, and the next cycle of 2030 to 2034, as the estimates are about 600 plus million. And as one of the things to put into perspective to the scale of this, there's approximately 27,000 buildings in the city of New York that are impacted by this law. And of those, that they provide approximately 900 million square feet of buildings. So that puts into some perspective the scale of the law. To answer your question, building owners should get on top of this as best they can with prudent professional advice on what's their most efficient plan. If I may give you a perspective, this would be for the same building because the current rates, the charges on the building might be, in this one example I have here, about $15,000 a year, and that could go up to 300 plus in the next cycle. So we see some scale of the improvements. The
For
city is
15 to 300. Did
Yes.
I hear that
So
right?
the city, yes,
Wow.
you did. So the city is significantly, I mean, it's like a 22 times jump from one
Yeah.
cycle to the next. And the thing to remember is somebody does a commercial loan, close the commercial loan today, they refinance in 3031. This will already be well in place. You have to think about, as the building owner, where am I going to be when I refinance? I've only
Mm.
paid off about 9% of the loan. If this gets high enough, I may have some real challenges refinancing at the current balance then, which would be just simply a rate and term mortgage. In almost sense, my financing plans would not have any element of a cash out refinancing at that point if this becomes onerous enough.
That's a fantastic point right there, Ed. That And that falls right into start with the close in mind, which is you got to really think out to when you have to refinance and what the implications of this local law 97 would be at that time, especially if it's impacting NOI and valuation to that extent that, like you had just indicated, you're going to have to be paying in to
Oh,
refinance.
absolutely. And the building owner has to be looking at how do my cash flows change over the next 5 years, giving these above inflation increases in electric costs. Now, that's important. The common area electric in the power building is not that much, but we have several asset types that have master electric, such as an office building, such as a hotel, such as a hospital.
Hmm,
Not all of those expenses are passed off to the tenants,
right.
but that's something that a building owner has to think about.
This has been great, So today we talked about local law 97, about why you should care now and how it's more than just a compliance issue. It directly affects value, leverage, execution, how you think about the property in the future, and the difference between essentially avoiding these last minute, we'll call them beyond hurdles. I mean, I think that you can safely say that, especially when you're in a situation where you can see fines 22. I mean, that's a real strong, big number.
Right. Well, and all of these issues are known today.
They are
So
no
the building owner and all the participants in a real estate transaction know what the challenges are today and have a reasonably good expectation of what they will be in 5 years.
and to bring back a very strong point you brought earlier with regards to enforcement, the city is serious about this. It was said during the current mayor's campaign, they've nearly doubled the budget of enforcement between last year and this year, and the feeling is it'll probably continue to get increased. So, long story short, you should be thinking about it now. You should be
Yes.
addressing it now. So, before we wrap, Ed, I know are very well studied on this. You spend a lot of time educating anyone and everyone on this. So in the comments, when I post this, I'm going to give some information about you, but I want everybody to hear that Ed is an expert in this and that he can present any of these, anything we've covered today and a lot more. I've seen the presentation. You should see it too. And definitely use that as a resource with this. Before
Right.
we end that, any closing comments?
Well, I feel very strongly about this issue. I think a lot more education needs to occur in the real estate profession and outside. I very much welcome an opportunity to speak before any group on this issue and have a good exchange and hopefully provide some useful information.
Well, it was definitely valuable for me. I am pretty sure it'll be valuable to the audience. Ed, thank you very much for being
Thank you,
part of the
Dorian.
show. And I look forward to hearing more from you because Local Law 97 has just started.
Yes.
Thank you guys. Be
Thank you.
well and see you at the next episode.